Exactly 142 years ago today, Korea and the U.S. established diplomatic relations. The two countries have spent more than half a century as allies, and the alliance, touted as one of the world's most successful and enduring, has now become the linchpin of regional security. But Seoul and Washington face growing challenges from many directions amid a rapidly evolving geopolitical environment, growing protectionism of national interests, and political polarization in both countries. And this edition of Within the Frame, we examine the key issues surrounding the Korea-U.S. alliance and their prospects. Joining me in the studio is our weekly commentator, Myong-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. It's always a great pleasure to have you with us.
Likewise, good to be here.
We also have VOA Correspondent Jessica Stone joining us from Washington, D.C. It's great to see you again.
Good evening.
All right, Dr. Go, let's kick things off with you. Korea and the U.S. have been expanding their alliance beyond traditional boundaries in recent years. How do you assess the current state of South Korea-U.S. alliance, and what would you pick as the biggest threat that could undermine the centuries or decades-old military partnership?
Well, it feels like centuries, and in that sense, that it's very solid, and then it's very robust, and has been evolving. I mean, people don't remember the fact that our K-U.S. alliance had up and downs throughout history. But then I think right now we are enjoying one of the best moments of the alliance. So the alliance between the South Korea and the United States started out mostly as a military alliance. So it's about the protection of South Korea against North Korea mostly, but has evolved into the so-called global comprehensive alliance. Now, the South Korea and the United States are essentially trying to align their policies in many different domains, not just in the defense, but then also in economy, trade, in fact, diplomacy. We are also talking about defending the same values that we share, democracy and freedom. And so in that sense, I think Korea has become not just a linchpin for the regional security, but also a major partner for the United States for the global governance, I would say. So in that sense, I think we have to commend both countries for having achieved such a great state of development in terms of alliance. Also, you said there's no many comparisons like this around the world, and I'm sure in the United States, they see South Korea as an upstanding partner when it comes to cooperation, as well as working together on many different challenging tasks that we face together. But then, unfortunately, clearly there are clouds over the horizon. And now I guess the major challenge, we have to say this, is the fact that there's a growing domestic skepticism about our alliance, not just about the ROK-US alliance, but the alliance in general. In the some parts of the political class in Washington, you mentioned about the possible return of the former President Donald Trump. He's even on the trail criticizing the US allies, mostly in Europe, less so when it comes to the Asian countries that are allied with the United States, such as Korea and Japan. But nonetheless, the same argument applies here, which is the fact that the allies of the United States are not really bearing the fair share of the burden when it comes to its own defense, as well as providing other types of global goods, global common goods. So I think South Korea is working very hard to counter this kind of accusations, and I think South Korea is willing to do more. And we are seeing this kind of actions, especially with the change of administration from President Moon Jae-in to President Yoon Suk-yeol. Right now, today, in Seoul, there's an AI global conference going on because South Korea wants to take the leadership when it comes to formulating a global joint response to not just exploiting the opportunities of artificial intelligence, which there are plenty, but also potential downsides. So in that sense, I think this is exactly kind of role that the United States has been expecting from its allies, and Korea is more at the forefront of delivering on these expectations.
So you picked growing skepticism about alliance as one of the big threats that could undermine South Korea-U.S. alliance. Now, Jessica, the hottest issue of the South Korea-U.S. alliance right now is perhaps the defense cost sharing that will take effect from 2026. The two sides kicked off their second round of negotiations in Seoul yesterday to decide how much Korea should shoulder to support U.S. troops stationed in Korea. What have you learned so far about Washington's stance on the matter?
Well, I'm afraid defense officials are pretty tight-lipped here in Washington about what's the state of play in those negotiations in Seoul. But the American chief negotiator, Linda Specht, said Saturday when she arrived that these talks are about the importance of the alliance and the support that the U.S. and South Korea give each other. And she's previously taken the position, which is Washington's position, that Washington is looking for a, quote, fair and equitable outcome in these talks. This round's goal, of course, as you mentioned, is to really get down to more specifics on cost sharing between the two countries and a distribution of defense costs. As you know, Seoul has already agreed to raise the payment by 13.9% between 2019 and 2021. So there's no argument in the Biden administration that Seoul is not meeting the moment in that sense.
So many local news outlets here say that an intense tug of war is expected between the two sides to set the details, such as the scale of cost sharing, of course, and the various standards that will be the base of calculating defense amounts. And from my understanding, the negotiations stretched to up to 10 rounds in the past, so we'll see how long it'll take this time around. Dr. Go, as the U.S. presidential election nears, concerns are rising over presidential candidate Donald Trump's America First policy and its impact on South Korea-U.S. alliance. But Korean ambassador to the U.S. Cho Hyun-dong has said that he reassured that the alliance is unshakable and that it will be even strengthened further because it is an institutionalized cooperation. What are your thoughts on this?
So what Ambassador Cho Hyun-dong meant by institutionalizing the alliance is the fact that essentially the United States is carving out a unique domain for South Korea and its policies around the world, especially when it comes to the Indo-Pacific area. So I can take an example, for instance, when it comes to cybersecurity, United States cannot go alone. It's very costly, and then there are many countries in Asia-Pacific region, and the United States cannot have taking care of all these countries to ensure their cybersecurity, then somebody else has to step in. And there are countries like Korea, Japan, Australia. So, the United States has created, in fact, a policy framework where the United States will have to depend on its allies to achieve its policy goals in this region. And so we have many applications of such framework in other policy domains as well. So if, say, there's a change of heart in Washington and tries to change U.S. policy in the Indo-Pacific, then the United States will have to not just change overall policy, but also find new partners. And that's going to be very challenging. So essentially, South Korea, Japan, Australia have become default partners for the United States. And this is going to be unshakable, as Ambassador Cho has pointed out, and also very difficult to remove. So this is the intention behind this. But in addition to that, there are other aspects to institutionalization of the alliance. So we don't really recognize this as a manifestation of the ROK-US alliance, but in fact, you can see this as an extension of the alliance. For instance, the Camp David agreement, where the Korea, Japan, and the United States, the three countries have declared that they're going to work very closely together, not just in matters of defense, but also in technological development and other areas. This is another form of extension of the alliance. So when you are involving third countries into the mix, then it becomes very difficult to remove United States out of the equation, for instance. So everything is about raising the political cost to changing the whatever strategy the U.S. has right now in this part of the world. So if there's a political change in Washington, then there's a different idea about the alliance, but it's going to be very costly and time-consuming for a new government in Washington to change the structure that already exists. So essentially, it's the idea that whatever solution you see right now is the best solution the United States will ever have, and that it will involve Korea. That's the idea.
And so it'll be hard, difficult, even for former President Trump, to drastically change the structure that has been set between South Korea and the U.S. for their alliance. Now, Jessica, the U.S. presidential election is now less than 6 months away, and like it or not, it'll be a rematch between Biden and Trump. Where do they each stand on the Korea-U.S. alliance and key issues surrounding it?
Well, they have very different approaches, as Dr. Go has outlined. And I think what's interesting about the way that he addressed your question in terms of solidifying the framework of alliances in the region, which is the Biden administration's approach to the region, is that it also allows a president like President Trump, if he were to win again, to say, look, we're farming out. We are not taking ownership the way we did of Afghanistan, of Iraq, of unilateral action. And that's very appealing to parts of the American electorate that don't want to see the United States prosecute wars around the world by itself. So yes, President Trump, I think, has been pretty clear about where he stands in terms of alliances. He is much more in favor of bilateral agreements and bilateral relationships than multilateral relationships and multilateral organizations. And he has continued to call for more cost sharing between South Korea and the United States when it comes to the 28,000 U.S. troops stationed on the peninsula. In terms of North Korea, though, there's less daylight between the two administrations. Certainly on the diplomatic side, the Trump administration took the position, as you well recall, that they would negotiate directly with Kim Jong-un and they would have open lines of communication. And that was in keeping with President Moon's approach, too, at the time. We are seeing that both administrations, though, take the same position on denuclearization. There is no daylight there, where both administrations, past and current, have said that that is not negotiable, that North Korea needs to denuclearize. That having said that, certainly the Biden administration has taken many more pains, as we've been discussing, to establish and solidify alliances in the region to not only counter North Korea, but to counter China, to take positions on what's going on between Russia and North Korea and Russia and China. And they found a very willing partner there with South Korea. You know, it has to be pointed out, of course, too, that the Biden administration is doing this at a time where they are taking a lot more resources and time with what's going on in Ukraine and with what's now going on in Gaza. And so they need their alliances around the world to continue to reinforce the rule of law and the world order that the post-World War order after World War II that the United States and South Korea and other major democracies have upheld since that time.
So you mentioned that one thing that both Biden and Trump agree on is the fact that the need to denuclearize North Korea. But from my understanding, there are growing calls in Washington to sort of very reluctantly, accept North Korea as a nuclear power and move on to disarmament talks. So we'll keep close tabs on that issue as well. Now, the issue of South Korea's nuclearization has also resurfaced after remarks made by Elbridge Colby, a leading candidate for America's next top security advisor should Trump win the election. He said South Korea's nuclear armament should no longer be seen as off limits, saying the U.S. may not be able to live up to its defense commitments to South Korea if North Korea can conduct nuclear attacks on American cities. While many here in South Korea are also voicing concerns about this, what is the Biden administration's take?
Well, the Biden administration, and certainly in the Washington Declaration last April, reinforced that the nuclear umbrella of the United States would apply to South Korea. And in so doing, is really taking the position that there's no need for South Korea to become a nuclear power. And as we know, Washington said that it's prepared to use its nuclear capabilities in the defense of South Korea to deter specifically North Korea. And this is a strategy that Washington has been taking. It's resulted in about 95% of the world's countries choosing not to develop nuclear weapons because of this promise of the nuclear umbrella. So that is the current position of the Biden administration on that.
All right. Now, Dr. Koh, North Korea fired several short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea just a day after President Putin held a summit with Xi Jinping of China. How do you see this?
So I don't think it's an expression of displeasure at the meeting between President Xi and President Putin. I think it could be more of a marketing move on the part of North Korea. I mean, it's kind of an interesting take, I would say. I don't think it was directed at South Korea per se. I mean, South Korea is now in the middle of carrying out military drills right now. So I think what's interesting is that looking into the type of short-range ballistic missile that they tested, it didn't involve the type of missile that North Korea apparently exported to Russia for their use in Ukraine. So there's a recent visit by a Ukrainian delegation. They had an interview with KBS, Korean national broadcaster, and they reported that the Ukrainian government found out that Russia had fired 60 KN-23 ballistic missile in Ukraine, and this KN-23 missile is the potentially theater-level tactical missile that's capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. And this is a very sophisticated missile. It can avoid missile defenses. So essentially, it's a very expensive form of missile. Whereas the missiles that North Korea tested a couple of days ago, these are much simpler version. It's still guided. There's enough range to reach South Korea. It's a range of 300 kilometers. But it's a much cheaper, economical, mass production version of a short-range ballistic missile. So it's possible that North Korea is trying to market those missiles to Russia now. Russia has a huge need for short-range ballistic missiles. The ones that they got from North Korea are the ones that North Korea wants to deploy in their own country to target South Korea. So we have to remember that since September last year, 2023, North Korea has been very not passive, but very quiet, relatively speaking, in terms of missile testing. For instance, the testing of KN-23 essentially came down to zero after September last year. And the reason is because they diverted all their missile production for export to Russia. So now North Korea is trying to replenish the missile stocks. They are using cheaper versions, and chances that we might see some of these missiles that North Korea tested last week in Ukraine in the near future.
So firing the short-range ballistic missiles right after the Putin-Xi summit was North Korea's strategic marketing move to boast the capacity of its missiles. I think it's quite interesting how you put it that way. Now, Jessica, Putin and Xi issued a joint statement, a large part of which was dedicated to slamming the U.S. and the West. It said the U.S. and its allies must halt military intimidation against North Korea and what they called Washington's destructive and hostile course. How is the U.S. reacting to the criticism?
Well, the U.S. really isn't changing course in response to those comments. Not surprisingly, the reaction has been to double down on tariffs, as we've seen, against Chinese EVs, to deny China access to not only U.S. markets for some of their products, but to U.S. technologies and to Western technologies that underpin their development with AI, with supercomputing. As we know, Treasury officials here have said that the world can't allow China to basically use the playbook that it used to rise economically thus far, which is to flood the market with cheap goods that are subsidized and put other countries and other industries out of business as a result. Washington has continued also to put pressure on Beijing with respect to its relationship with Moscow and North Korea in its war against Ukraine, or I should say its relationship with Moscow when it comes to Ukraine, arguing that the PRC can't have deeper connections with Europe and with Western countries and Western democracies at the same time supplying Russia with some of the things that it needs to prosecute that war in Ukraine. The Biden administration has continued to ask Beijing to use its influence to discourage Moscow from cooperating with North Korea or from becoming a source of weapons there. But as Dr. Guo pointed out, there's little evidence that that's been advice that's been heeded. And we have also seen the continuation of the use of sanctions on the part of Washington. Biden administration sanctioning 5 Russia-based groups for transferring North Korea weapons just last week. Biden has been pretty clear that he believes that Xi is a dictator and that Putin is a killer. And so behind those two very succinct characterizations of those leaders is a policy that doesn't appear to be wavering in terms of how it's interacting with this part of the world.
So I think that the message from Washington to China is very clear that it should stop supporting Russia in its fight against Ukraine. Now, Dr. Go, many had anticipated that Putin may drop by North Korea after concluding his trip to China, but there was no such visit. And some experts say that it may reflect President Xi Jinping's discomfort, if you will, in the emergence of China, Russia, North Korea axis. What's your take?
So clearly, there's certain truth to that. I think China doesn't. I mean, I think China is concerned about not so much the substance, but rather the optics of the perception that Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang are closely aligned against the West. China, unlike Russia, North Korea, is still economically actively engaged with the West in trades and investments. So clearly, China doesn't want to give the perception that China is very much active in creating this bloc of authoritarian regimes. But on the other hand, in terms of substance, clearly China is assisting Russia with their increasing their wartime weapons production, also helping North Korea to evade the sanctions that are currently in place. So I think what was happening was China probably cares about the perception, but not to the extent that would prevent somebody like Vladimir Putin from going to North Korea. Clearly, there's something else in play, or in combination with many other different factors. One major factor could have been North Korea's own pride when it comes to this kind of diplomatic moves, because North Korea wants to be seen as a peer power equal to China and Russia, at least in terms of influence and at least in its capability to cause trouble. So I think, and they want to get the respect that it deserves as a peer power to China and Russia. So if Vladimir Putin had gone to Pyongyang after his visit to China, then it would create the perception that North Korea is a second-tier power compared to China. So I think that could have been hurt Kim Jong-un's pride. And now that, especially now that Russia that depends on North Korea for weapons rather than the other way. So that could have been one factor. And second could be reticence on the part of Russia from going to Pyongyang, because that could be considered to be a red line for South Korea. Russia, despite the image that it projects as a major power that's taking the initiative and is essentially is about to claim victory in Ukraine, it's right now in a very weak position. Its wartime weapons production is it's not really growing as fast as Putin wants, faces a lot of strong sanctions, and there's a domestic discontent because of the war, because of the high cost of the war. So for Russia, it's very important that South Korea stays on the sidelines. If South Korea decides to lend direct military assistance to Ukraine, that could potentially change the direction of the war on the ground in Ukraine. So, and then for that, it's imperative for Russia not to provoke South Korea too much. So, for instance, going to Pyongyang, Putin going to Pyongyang would be one such instance. So, I think not a single factor played a role in preventing Putin from going to North Korea, but the combination of all these factors probably prevented Putin from going to Pyongyang this time around.
So the President Putin not visiting Pyongyang as many had anticipated, not just reflects Xi Jinping's thoughts, but also various other factors as well. And it looks like, although the emergence of China, North Korea, Russia axis, it looks like it's becoming clearer than before. But even so, when looking closer into respective countries and interests and tactics, they all have different diplomatic tactics to seek their own national interests. All right, thank you so much, as always, Dr. Go and Jessica, for sharing your valuable insights.
My pleasure.
My pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.